Okay, everybody, welcome. As we started Chag Sameach, we want to wish us the tail end of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And even though, of course, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Hey Iyar is, of course, on Shabbos, but that's a whole other story. And anyways, a pleasure. Welcome back, Adina Blaustein, Yoetzet Halacha Adina Blaustein, who I guess I last saw in November in Israel when she was one of the four cohorts, along with her daughter, who graduated from they did the graduation together at Nishmat, and this fall. It was very nice, the 26 young Talmidot Chachamot. And Nadina spoke here, of course, a few times for us. She is the content team director. Is that the official title for Aleph Beta? And she serves as a Yoetzet Halacha in Beechwood, Ohio. That's another way to say Cleveland. It's I guess a suburb of Cleveland.
The suburb of Cleveland, right
Yeah,
outside the city of
yeah, it's where a
Cleveland.
Jewish community lives. Okay, Bakasha, time to get started. Parshat Tazria Metzora, you picked a really great, interesting Parsha. So I want to see how you're going to make it come alive and be exciting.
Okay, Rabbi
Okay.
Kalman, thank you so much for that challenge. It's funny, a few years ago, in the height of COVID, really, Eli Leibovitz, a comedian, I still remember his post about Parshat Tazria Metzora. He wrote, "Finally, the rabbis have something relevant to say about Parshat Tazria Metzora," because one of the most bizarre aspects about the process of the Metzora is that this individual requires quarantine. And um, it's really quite strange to think about what this biblical affliction is really meant to symbolize. And although what I really want to focus on is the Haftorah, I want to just, I think, illustrate this question about the quandary and the ambiguity surrounding tzara'at from the text of the Torah just a little bit. Rabbi Kalman, do you mind making me a host so I can share
I
my screen? We can all
apologize.
get the
Yes, we
sources
were
at the
talking
same
too
time.
much about Cleveland and the Flatbush. I
I
forgot.
know we really just come to schmooze.
That's it. That's it.
That's
The
why we're
share is
doing
just
this.
the afterthought. Yeah, I get it. Okay. Your
Okay,
co.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. So can you all see my sources? It should have a title page. Yeah, great, wonderful. So when you take a look at from Vayikra and Parshat Tazria at some of the verses describing tzara'at, you see that it's some sort of skin disease. The convention of translating tzara'at as leprosy is an innovation, I would say, of the King James Bible. If you look, not that Art Scroll is the be all and end all of Torah translations, but I do actually like that they just simply translate tzara'at as tzara'at because it really eludes any sort of English definition. Leprosy is a real disease. It's Hansen's disease, and it has its own manner of treatment. It's clear from reading Torah, at least, I think, that the treatment eludes looking at this as just a physical malady. And I'm sure many of you might be aware of the midrash that suggests that people who speak lashon hara get tzara'at. And why is there this tradition, this tradition that is nowhere in the Chumash, by the way, that tzara'at is a spiritual disease? Well, if you look at the treatment pattern, the individual afflicted with tzara'at must confirm the diagnosis by going to the Kohen. And if the Kohen isn't sure if there is indeed tzara'at, the person waits a period of 7 days, which has a sort of spiritual significance also within the world of biblical states of Tuma and Tahara. For example, Nida, Zava, this notion of the 7 days. And if the Kohen does in fact diagnose the person with tzara'at, the person must be secluded from outside the camp, and the treatment options involve korbanot, etc. Um, but there is something bizarre here because if tzara'at is purely a spiritual affliction, why does this person need to quarantine outside the camp? And and if this person has really this physical condition, right? It's a sickness, so to speak. It's a malady with no spiritual connotations. In other words, no pagam, no chet, no aspect of this person morally that's repugnant or morally that must be corrected. Then why go to the Kohen? So it really eludes categories. And I'll just emphasize, I think, one of the strangest pieces, I think many people are familiar with the notion of quarantine, but one of the strangest pieces, if you look at verses 45 and 46, Mem He and Mem Vav, Hatzorah asher bo hanega begadav yu frumim v'rosho yeh farua, v'al safam yatev v'tamei tamei yikra. He sort of covers his upper lip, or maybe he's covering his mouth, Ibn Ezra says. In other words, he's almost masking, right? Putting on a mask in a way. That's how Ibn Ezra translates it. And Ibn Ezra says he's calling out Tameh, Tameh as he's walking around outside the camp so that he's not catchy, he's not contagious. Even in the Middle Ages, it seems Ibn Ezra was familiar with the notion of something that could be contagious. But of course, other commentaries, like Ramban famously says, no, this is purely a spiritual disease, also a physician, right? Enenu batava klal. It is a way of emphasizing to the person some spiritual introspection is needed. So, what we really see from this brief survey of tzara'at is that it really eludes a categorization. And there is this ambiguity of, is it a spiritual disease? Is it just a mundane disease, right? A natural disease? The answer to those questions, I will never be able to say with any certainty, right? I don't think any of us can, obviously. But what fascinates me more is that the Torah clearly is presenting tzara'at to us as an amalgam, as a quandary. Why does ambiguity feature so prominently in relation to tzara'at? And here is where I think the Haftorah can perhaps shed light on this tension that's going on in the Parsha. I am writing a book about Haftarot. I'll be very, very excited at the point when I can say, go buy my book and you'll see some of my thoughts there. And then we could just spend the whole time chatting and you can just read the chapters and we don't have to go through this. Obviously, this is much more fun. But um, if you'd like to actually read the chapter, my draft, just put your email in the chat and I'll copy those before the end of the lecture and I'll send that to you. But the theory and the kind of philosophy of how I'm studying Haftarot is that I'm presenting Haftarot as a conscious commentary on Parsha. Sometimes texts within Navi are clearly written quite deliberately with the Parsha in mind. And one famous example, perhaps, is when Yehoshua sends spies to Jericho. It's clear when you're reading it that the biblical author of the book of Yehoshua has Parshat Shlach in mind. There are just too many common phrases. And so when it's chosen as the Haftarah for Parshat Shlach, it's like an easy choice as Haftarah. Other times, however, it's not really so clear why this text is chosen as Haftarah, why that text. And when what then emerges is, in a sense, an intertextuality that functions as its own kind of commentary just by the nature of the Misadrei Haftarah, right? These Jews over hundreds and hundreds of years who selected Haftarot, their choices, in a sense, serve as a commentary. Um, in this case, when we explore figures in the Haftorah who have tzara'at, I do think it's fair to say that there's some commonality, that there's some room to say that perhaps there is a theme running through Tanakh about what tzara'at is and what it represents, because tzara'at doesn't appear that often. I haven't seen any deliberate intertextuality between the passages from Navi and the passages from the Parsha. But I do find that there's a common theme, and the Haftarah does function, as I said, as a sort of commentary on the Parsha. So let's dive in. This year, we're reading Tazria and Metzora as a double Parsha, as we do most years, in fact. And the Haftarah that we'll read is going to be the story of from Melechim, chapter 7. But really, both of the haftarot for Tazria and for Metzora, when we read them separately, one for Tazria, we read the story of Naaman, the Aramean general, who is afflicted with Sara'at and is cured by Elisha, and we'll dive deeper in just a moment. And then for Metzora, we usually read the story of the Arba Metzoraim, these, and we'll explore that more deeply in just a moment. Both of these stories, I believe, should be studied together because even though we usually only read one of them because we combine Tazria and Metzora, they really function as one narrative arc within the book of Melachim. Not only because Naaman has tzarat and a few chapters later, 4 Israelites have tzarat, but because, as we'll see, Naaman is an Aramean general, and in the second Haftarah, Israel is besieged by the Arameans. So it's really one narrative arc, and that's why I feel like it's quite important to study it together, to study both of these Haftarot together, even though the Shabbat will only read one of these. So let me give you a tiny bit of context now that we'll really dive into these two Haftarot. Okay, so take yourselves to in the midst of the First Temple period, and I'll pull up a map. That's always helpful. And this is after years and years after the kingdoms of Israel and Judah have split, years after Shlomo's death, and years of rebellion and civil war have really entrenched Israel and Judah as separate kingdoms. And each of the kingdoms are on this downward spiritual spiral. And politically as well, you have these high points where each kingdom has power and really is functioning among these smaller kingdoms in this area as independent, but we're really coming towards this downward trajectory. Eliyahu is sent to the kingdom of Israel by Hashem to try to affect this intense change. And Eliyahu really is quite effective in dramatic moments. Think about the moment of Har Carmel, where all the people fall on their faces, Hashemu Elokim, when they see the fiery, this ball of fire from Hashem descend and eat up his korban, and he kills all the prophets of Baal. He really has this like instantaneous tshuva movement, really quite dramatic. But Eliyahu isn't really interested in sticking around for the long term and dealing with the complicated and complex notion of what do you do next? How do you deal with the fact that the avodah zarah, the corruption is so entrenched in the kingdom of Israel? How do you really deal day to day? His successor, Elisha, really mirrors Eliyahu in a number of ways. There are many, many stories, and this is really that section of Navi that we're talking about where Elisha does miracles similar to Eliyahu. And this piece from the Haftarah is really taken from this section of Melachim Bet, where we encounter the prophet Elisha. So our story in the Haftarah from Naaman really opens up with Naaman, who is this Aramean general. And right away, I just want to point out what a rare story this is within the book of Melachim, because the book of Melachim means kings, and it refers to Israelite kings and kings of Yehudah. And Naaman, not only is he not from Israel and Judah, he is not a king. He is a general, and yet he is the protagonist of this chapter. The king during this time is unnamed, and I think that is also a fascinating thing to consider, the fact that the king of Israel is not named in this chapter, and yet this Aramean general is named. So Naaman is named, and the introduction to Naaman is fascinating. He is a Sartzava. He is a commander of the army for the king of Aram. He is an Ish Gadol. And what you see in this first introductory verse is that every phrase seems to introduce something magnificent about him. And then the second phrase seems to take him down a notch. So you know the old joke, right? Oh, my son, there's the president, sitting next to him is my son, the doctor, right? like the way that people can sometimes, the moms can sometimes take you down a notch in a way that nobody else can. The introduction to Naaman, he's a Sar Tzava, he's a general to Melech Aram. He's an Ish Gadol lifnei Adonav, right? He's Nisu Panim, but it's Kibonatan Hashem Chua, right? He's all these great things only because his masters allow him to serve, but also because God grants victory to Aram. So he himself, although he has this incredible high status, is really the prophetic narrator is just reminding us it's Kibonatan Hashem Chua Aram. It's because God is allowing Aram to be successful during this time. And then we have this literary structure again. Ha'ish, Haya Gibor Chayil, he's this great warrior, and yet Metzora. He has Sarat. And so this is the problem that sets off the plot of the rest of the chapter. And in the next few psukim, we see how he goes about starting to solve this problem. We learn that during this time, Aram had been sending out these gedudim, these raiding forces into the kingdom of Israel, and they would capture people. One of the people captured was a young girl, and she was taken to become a slave for Naaman's wife. We see what a difficult time this is from this perspective. Just to pause for a moment and think about how demoralizing this must have been for the kingdom of Israel during this time period. But that is not the focus of this chapter, at least. This chapter really focuses on Naaman. This young Israelite servant girl, this slave, suggests to Gvirtan, Mrs. Naaman, saying, by the way, there is this magic man in Samaria, a prophet. I bet he could cure Naaman. Of course, that person is Elisha. And I'll just also pause for a second and just say, we're seeing this trope develop of a subversion of expectations. And we saw this in the introduction to Naaman. He's this great guy, and yet he's a Metzora. A great guy and a slave girl, right? Not only a slave, not only an Israelite, not only this person who is inconsequential in his household, suggests go to Israel. It's bizarre because that is their enemy during this time. So Chua for Naaman comes in what we're seeing a very unlikely place. Naaman goes and tells his master, the king of Aram, about this possibility. And again, the king of Aram says, all right, let's send a message to the king of Israel. Maybe we can get you some audience with this prophet, whoever it is they're talking about. I want to point out something that I briefly alluded to before, which is that Melech Aram and Melech Yisrael, neither of them are named. Probably, as I said, it's Yoram and potentially Ben-Hadad. Both of these are figures within the book of Melachim, but the only one, again, who's named is Naaman. So all of these anonymous figures are meant to be foils for Naaman, and as we'll see in a bit, the prophet Elisha. They, in a sense, are the two key figures in this story, and everybody else is unnamed, in a sense, to put the spotlight on them. The king of Israel has this bizarre, strange reaction to getting this message from the king of Aram. So the king of Aram sends a message of a letter to the king of Israel, and along with it, silver, gold, 10 changes of clothing, in other words, a bribe. But when the king of Israel gets this letter, he's not delighted to receive all this money and delighted that, oh, maybe this is a signal that Aram wants diplomacy. Instead, he has the completely opposite reaction. Look at verse 7, Pasuk Zayin. Vayhi kekra melech Yisrael et sefer vayikra b'gadav. He tears his clothing. Vayomer ha'elokim ani lamet l'chayot. Like, who am I, God, that I'm gonna allow an able Naaman to live or to die? That like I'm supposed to cure this person. This is a pretext. It's fascinating that the king of Israel, the way he understands this letter isn't a serious request, give me this prophet, of can you help me find this prophet? The king of Israel interprets it as if I don't procure this prophet and if I don't somehow ensure that Naaman is going to be cured, you will use that as a pretext to incite war against me. Now, maybe that's correct. Maybe for the king of Aram and for the king of Israel, that's the détente and that's this kind of cold war that they're in during this time. We'll see in later chapters this will become much more intense and they will it will actually become a full-on war. Um, but the situation as it is at this point in time is that the king of Israel feels extremely threatened by this letter. And I think the reason for this is he knows, like previous kings before him who encountered Elisha, and I'm sorry, who encountered not only Elisha, but also Eliyahu, that a king cannot control a prophet. And a prophet is never going to do anything just to please a king. A prophet is not a magic man. And Naaman and the king of Aram are going to have to realize that. And the king of Israel knows that as well, that he can't just get Elisha to just cure Naaman. That's not how a prophet works. And so he's, I think, right to be scared. He knows he can't control the word of Hashem just for a few coins, and that's really going to be part of the lesson that the key figures in this story are going to learn. Um, but Elisha somehow, Kishmo Elisha Ish Elokim Kikaramel Chisrael Begadav, Elisha somehow hears that this is what happens, and he sends a message to the king, and he basically says. Lama karata begadecha. Like, why are you tearing your clothing? Why are you so distraught? Yavona elai v'yada ki yesh navi b'Yisrael. Like, come to me and you will know there is a prophet in Israel. Elisha basically says, you should have just come to me, right? You're either there, it seems like Elisha is trying to emphasize to them the way that you're relating to a prophet is either as a somebody who you are meant to have no interactions with at all, or somebody who's a magic man you control. What about relating to a prophet as somebody who you can seek counsel from, somebody who can care for you? That really, I think, sums up the personality of prophecy that Elisha has. That's perhaps somewhat different than his predecessor Eliyahu. Uh, Elisha, at this point, Elisha and Naaman begin to interact. And again, through messengers, right? It's another interesting feature of this story, how much diplomacy takes place through letters, through messengers. And Naaman comes, Pasuk Tet, verse 9, Vayvo Naaman besusav uberachbo, right? With his whole in state and chariot. And he stands, Petach habayit Elisha, Vaishlach elav Elisha malach lemor. And Elisha sends a messenger to him saying, Haloch v'rachatzta sheva pa'amim b'Yarden. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. And yashav sarcha lecha v'tahar. And you'll be cured. And Naaman gets incredibly angry at this suggestion. And his response in verse 12, Pasuk Yud Bet, is, I think, really shows the depths of his arrogance, really, and his lack of belief that Elisha really can cure him. Halo tov amana ufarpar naharot damesek mikol memei Yisrael halo rachotz bahem mitaharti. And I think it's not only arrogance that is motivating Naaman to say, aren't my local bodies of water in Damascus, the rivers of Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? I think what Naaman's basically saying is like, if I need to just get clean, I have waters in Damascus. And are you telling me that the waters themselves are magical? I think we might say, the question we might say the same hovers under the surface of Vayikra also, right? Are the waters of mikvah somehow magical that they can restore you, right? What makes the waters of a mikvah any better than the waters of a bathtub? But what is the undertones here, at least in this episode, is Elisha basically saying the humble waters of Jordan and the fact that I, a prophet of God, are telling you that you will be restored through submission in this very ordinary and incredibly humble act that will cure you. And eventually, that's exactly what happens. He stalks off in a rage. His servants come and basically tell him, the prophet's not asking you to do anything difficult. The prophet's just saying, hey, bathe and be clean. And he does it, right? Just for the heck of it. And lo and behold, his sarat is it goes away. Take a look at how the text describes in Pasuk Yodalid how his skin is described. Vayashav b'saro kibsar na'ar katon vaitar. His flesh becomes like that of a little boy's. And I think when you kind of take a step back and consider the narrative of Naaman, throughout is a subversion of power. He is this great guy and he is humbled. He is taken down a notch. His sara'at and the process of curing him from his sara'at forces a reversal of fortunes, forces him to have this sort of healing through which he is humbled. And that point is emphasized. This irony of reversal is emphasized in the final epilogue to Naaman's story, where Naaman attempts to reward Elisha. I'll go over this part just a little bit more quickly, just because I do want to have time for the next haftarah as well. He offers Elisha a gift. Elisha really emphasizes, I am not a magic man who pay a few coins and
It's
does.
interesting, excuse me, it's
Yes,
interesting that it doesn't use the word asaf to describe the cure here. Asaf
instead,
seems to
right.
be the best verb, and it's absent.
What do you make of that?
This isn't a real cure. This isn't a Hebrew cure. I think asaf is the Hebrew cure, as opposed to the Gentile cure doesn't.
That's interesting. In other words, that because Naaman is a foreign general, this is somehow something unique in his situation.
Asaph was used with Miriam in Numbers 11. She was cured, but Asaph, the word Asaph is used there. So
That
God,
that is true. However, there is no evidence that Miriam immersed,
no evidence that Miriam what?
that she immersed, right? She leaves the camp,
No, but she was cured.
right?
That's
Yeah.
the point. The bottom line is that she was cured.
Okay, that's interesting, right? I think um the point I'm trying to stress is that the literary feature running throughout the story of Naaman is an emphasis on reversal, an emphasis on what is great is taken down a notch. The one who is arrogant is forced to become like a child, right? And through the cure, his skin becomes like a child. He's meant to be cured, right? He's meant to be humbled and renewed, not through a display of power, which was what he scoffed at the prophet and said, I'll immerse in the waters of Damascus, right? Instead, it's through this humble river of Jordan. And that is emphasized in the final epilogue to this story where Elisha refuses any monetary gifts, right? Elisha is really emphasizing, I'm not somebody who you pay money to and I'll do your tricks for you. I'm a prophet of God, and if this was truth, this was truth. But Elisha's servant or attendant, Gehazi, sees this in a rather opportunistic way as to make some money. And so Gehazi runs after Naaman and he's like, oh, yeah, you could pay me. And Gehazi gets stricken with Sarat. So you see a reversal on so many levels. Sarat here in this story, if I would pause and say, well, what is Sarat? Who gets Sarat? Why does somebody get Sarat? We would say, it's a marker of deep spiritual failings, arrogance, greed, inability to humble oneself. And the cure requires a sort of lowering of oneself, a submission, a humility. Now, if we were to end there, this is the Haftarah for Tazria, not the Haftarah we'll be reading on Shabbat. We would say, okay, that's Sarat. But I think that it's really not enough just to look at this in isolation. Because if you skip forward just a few chapters, you see the epilogue of this story. The kingdom of Israel and Aram, as I said, are involved in this sort of Cold War that becomes much more intense to the point that Israel is put under siege, or the city of Shomron, Samaria, the capital city, is besieged by Aram. And the situation is incredibly dire. It is unclear if Naaman is the general waging that war. I just want you to pause for a moment and just think about it. Elisha just cured the general of Israel's enemy, right? That is bizarre to think about. So in a way, Elisha is persona non grata now in this epilogue, right? Because he, I would say, if you're living during this time period, if you're Yoram, king of Israel, why would you respect Elisha? Why would you look at Elisha and say, he is somebody I can turn to, he's somebody I can depend on? Didn't he just cure Naaman? But we see once again the theme of tzara'at emerges once again. So these two haftarot, really, as I said, are one narrative arc within the Book of Kings, and really, I think, should be considered together. So now we skip ahead a few chapters to the story of the four Metzoraim. So Israel finds itself under siege by Aram, and in the actual city of Shomron, there is devastating famine, and there is real starvation. There's an episode where the king is walking along and he hears of women describing their plans for cannibalism. And the king's response, and this is from the previous chapter, chapter 6, not included in the Haftarah, the king's response is basically to threaten to kill Elisha. And he fails once again to recognize that Elisha might actually hold the keys to salvation. Elisha himself, however, remains confident, and the previous chapter ends with Elisha emphasizing a prophecy of consolation and victory, where he basically says that there will be salvation, there will be restoration, and the siege will end. Okay. The story we read now, and that we'll study more closely, that is the Haftarah, and that we'll read the Shabbat, is the story of that salvation. But it's not told through the lens of the king, nor is it told through the lens of the prophet Elisha. It's told through the perspective of four Metzoraim, four lepers who are outside the city. So these four Metzoraim are kind of stuck because they presumably had to quarantine outside of the city before the siege because of their tzara'at. But once the city is under siege, right, there's probably this buffer zone outside the city. These Mitzoraim are basically facing this quandary, and this is where the Haftarah begins. Pasuk Gimel, V'amru ish l're'ehu, ma nachnu yoshvim po ad matnu. Like, what are we going to do? We're dead men walking. Either we go to town, Navo ha'ir v'hara'av ba'ir. If we go to town, we'll die there because of the famine. V'im yashavnu po v'matnu. But if we just stay here, for sure we'll die. We have no food. And so what they do is they calculate, right? Maybe our best chance, we have the most minute chance of surviving if we at least surrender to the army of the Arameans. And so their motivation in going to the Aramean camp is really just survival. It's this calculation, maybe they can survive if they do that. And incredibly enough, at twilight, they set out for Machane Aram. They come to the edges, Vihine ein sham ish, and nobody's there. And they don't know why, but what the prophetic narrator tells us, and this is evocative of what happens with the siege during the times of Chizkiyahu with the Assyrians, where Adonai yishmi et machane Aram kol rechev kol sus kol chay gadol, and God basically caused the Arameans to be delusional and hear the sound of an approaching army. It's really incredible, right? In Chizkiyahu's miracle, when Chizkiyahu was under siege, it was a Malach Hashem who killed all of the Assyrian forces besieging them. Here, it's almost like completely bloodless, where God caused the Arameans who were camped there around the city to just hear phantom noises of an approaching army and think that, oh my goodness, they must have hired some mercenaries, some allies must have come through. And so Vaikumu Vainusu Baneshef, they run off, they leave their tents, they leave their horses, they leave everything, they fled for their lives. And so these four Mitzoraim approach the camp of the Arameans, and all they find is emptiness, right? They just find an empty enemy camp. And their first instinct is not, let's go tell, Paul Revere style, let's go tell the Israelites in Shomron what has happened. Their first instinct is once again self-preservation. They basically, put together some treasures for themselves, hide it away, and then they're like, you know what, Pasuk Tet, maybe it's not the best thing what we're doing. It's good news. We should probably share the word with the people in Shomron. We should probably share the good news. And so, in fact, that's what they do. And they go and they tell the gatekeepers of the city, the guards on the ramparts, that, the siege is basically lifted. The enemies have deserted us. And indeed, just as Elisha predicted, they realize this is this incredible victory of but what's made even more miraculous is that no war was actually waged. The Arameans have completely retreated, and it's an incredible moment where, just as Elisha predicted, there's this incredible reversal of this dire situation. But taking a step back, we see that literary feature of the story of Naaman, where you have all of your expectations averted. A great general who's a Metzora, a great general of Aram who's forced to not only find about an Israelite prophet from a young Israelite slave girl, but his refu'ah is through not the waters of Damascus, but from the humble waters of the Jordan. It's all reverts your, subverts your expectations, right? The Tzaraat of Naaman goes to Gehazi. Every expectation is against what you were anticipating. That once again happens, where salvation comes from the people who you would least expect it. Those who were cast aside as impure now become the grand heralds of salvation. But I think the arc, forces us to encounter something that perhaps goes a step beyond that. Because each story leaves us really with a sense of unresolved tension. Naaman ended by pledging a sort of loyalty to Elisha and to God, but as we see, he's the enemy, the nation that'll soon besiege Samaria. And I'll go even a step further. If you read further in the book of Kings, Aram will play a major part in Israel's overall downfall. So again, it's this tension of, wow, Elisha saved the enemy. Elisha, why couldn't you have just left him with his Sarat? And similarly, the Metzora in themselves, this second Haftarah, they aren't quite heroes either. They are morally ambiguous. They stumble upon salvation by chance. They hide away treasure. That seems to motivate them more with sharing the news with the starving city of Shomron. So in a way, they're flawed heroes, they're reluctant heroes. Are they even heroes at all? Salvation comes through them, but maybe that doesn't even make them heroes. Like Naaman, there's this moral ambiguity that centers on them. And so I would take a step back and say what I think these two haftarot do is emphasize that question that we opened with, which is that I think tzara'at does really defy categorization, right? I opened with the question of, well, is it a physical disease or ailment? Is it a spiritual disease? And the haftarot really emphasize that what it is and who it strikes always is going to have some element of ambiguity. What we're meant to learn from it and how we're meant to treat those who get it also is defies, I think, an easy answer. I think sometimes we might say, well, if it's a spiritual disease, then somebody who gets sara'at, well, they must learn a lesson. I think what these haftarot are emphasizing is how dare we, as an onlooker, think that we might know what spiritual lesson our neighbor needs to learn, right? If the Torah were to present Sara'at as purely a spiritual affliction, perhaps it would cause a certain spiritual smugness in society, a smugness where those onlookers seeing somebody quarantined outside the camp with Sara'at might say, oh, you really do have to work on yourself, don't you? And that smugness is a sense is a hint of the very arrogance that is so despicable and that is so intended as a sort of illness that Sarat is perhaps meant to counteract. And so, lest we view every Metzora as somebody who deserves to be taken down a notch, perhaps in the epilogue in the story of the Arba Metzoraim, we see in a way our expectations of what Tzara'at is presented as this mundane matter-of-fact story that really lacks a clear moral. And really lacks a clear way of how we're meant to view these Arba Metzoraim, because it's through these individuals that Yeshua comes to Shamron. And so I think Tzara'at is not just a lesson of humility for those who are afflicted, but it's meant to be a lesson for those all around you. And maybe a bit of this ambiguity is why perhaps the Torah presents Tzara'at in this ambiguous way. As really just this spiritual, or this rather biblical affliction that demands treatment, without jumping to what might you assume this suggests about the person who has it. I'd like to conclude with sharing a bit of wisdom from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, whose Yoetzet was Rosh Chodesh Iyar, quite recent. He wrote this as part of an essay about religious responses to September 11th, and his words certainly resonate in every day and age and in every generation. He wrote, "Does history have religious meaning? For a believing Jew, the answer is clear. It certainly does. Yet this says nothing of our ability to offer explanations as to why particular events took place. To offer such explanations involves a great deal of chutzpah, tendentiousness, and arrogance. And so much like the Metzora is imperative upon this individual to look inward and seek a sort of spiritual healing to counteract the affliction. I think what Rav Lichtenstein is emphasizing is the theme that I'm perhaps trying to touch upon, which is, how dare you try to assume you can know the reason why your neighbor might be thusly afflicted." I'll conclude here. If there are any questions or comments, I'd be delighted to take them. For those of you who
I
would
would
like
say
some reading over Shabbat, just one moment, Mr. Hepner. For those of you who would like some reading, I'd be delighted to email you my essay on this. You could print it out and read it over Shabbat. Just put your email in the chat and I can email you that. All right.
I would say that the ambiguity as to the cause of Tzara'at echoes the ambiguity of the cause of the death of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, which is, and the relationship between the deaths of these students and the mourning that we perform during the time of counting the Omer. That's a wonderful, and I think we read about Tzara'at typically while we're counting the Omer, and that may also not be a coincidence.
Perhaps. Thank you. Certainly lends meaning to this time period. All right.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, thank you very much. Anybody? And okay, I just posted there in the chat box. Next Thursday afternoon, we're starting a new tour. Rabbi Barry Kleinberg will be giving talks on unorthodox thinkers, beginning with Isaiah Berlin. I actually think this is a fascinating series, I guess, which is why I encourage them to do it. But so that'll begin next Thursday, and of course, okay, my shir tomorrow morning on the Siddur up to Modi and Shmon Esrei at 9:15 in the morning. Rabbi Liebtag and Benny Gesundheit on Sunday, all the regular shir. Rabbi Shulman will be back. We missed Rabbi Shulman this week, Adina, because we did a little program on Rabbi Lichtenstein's Yoetzet. We had a couple of speakers, and yes,
Quite appropriate.
yes, as I'm sure people here know, and you mentioned his 10th Yoetzet was just the other day. So, anyways, okay. Otherwise, thank you for
Is there one link that works for those classes, like the one you have tomorrow morning and the other one
Yeah,
next week?
yeah.
It's all one link?
Pretty much, yeah. If you can register for all programs at once, and then you'll get a reminder before every class. Or if you only come to to this class, that class, specific class, you can register for that. But in reality, the link is the same, unless when we do a special program, then the links are different. But yes, the links are the same.
Oh, okay,
But you'll get a reminder before each class that you're registered for.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as I was saying, thank you for making Tazria and Metzora come alive a little bit, as we say, and with the lessons of it, of something that has no practical application anymore, the whole parsha, but of course the meaning has much to offer. Okay, then Mr. Eisen, Boker Tov, Chag Sameach, and it's Friday morning, almost 4 o'clock in the morning, almost after
4:15.
4:15. Are you going to play tennis soon?
No, I have a race, a 5K race. In
What
memory of
race?
a soldier who was killed. His family
Oh.
is organizing a race.
All right, sorry. Yeah, that's too much of that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, we should hear good news, everybody. Shabbat shalom, and thank you again.
Shabbat
And we look
shalom.
forward to
Thank you.
learning with you in the near future. And please invite a friend to come and join us. Thank you. Erev Tov.
Erev Tov, Boker Tov.
Shabbat shalom. Yes, Boker Tov, of course. Yes.